Hey everyone, this is Jane with Barlow Herbal, and happy Sunday, February 1st of 2026. Now, I have some really interesting thoughts to share with you this week. And the main thing that flowed in the first of the week for me was this thought. It feels like I'm sitting in a quiet timeline. So we all know that we have been talking about the timeline split, 3D moving to 5D. People are walking on this timeline and people are walking on this timeline. And I just had this really deep thing drop into me that the timeline that I'm sitting on or watching from, and this is not in a passive way at all, more from an observational way, a creativity way, but sitting, watching, the timeline feels really quiet. So I expanded on this during my journaling this week, and so it should be interesting to share this with you. So it's here's where I went with that. It's not confusion, more like moments of deep integration. The world is loud, definitely loud, but I am calm, wonderfully, a little eerily calm. So I just kind of have these moments where it feels so wonderful to be calm like this. When you know that the world is so loud, you can see it, you can feel it, but to be in this calm place, it feels a teeny bit eerie until it just you realize it's just wonderful. Okay. So then I wrote this after all the growth, loss, and insight. And I wrote that like 6 times because it's like growth, loss, you lose something when you have this massive amount of growth or awareness. Then you have this loss, and then you have this massive insight over and over and over again. I feel the opposite of loud or wanting to be loud. So I've lost my desire to convince anyone, make someone see. I'm just in this wonderful, quiet timeline. Okay. I don't feel frantic or panicked or overstimulated anymore. It feels like a still pocket of awareness, like this little cocoon of just, wow, my nervous system just feels so good. And I think that's one thing that we always hear and we always talk about is how do we quiet our nervous system and stay aware and all the stuff, right? So I'm not detached from reality at all in any way. It just can't yank me around anymore. Okay. The quiet and the stillness it is a little disconcerting. The quiet or stillness is a little disconcerting sometimes. I don't feel numbed out at all. It's like another layer of emotional maturity. That's kind of what it feels like. It just feels like another layer because we all know there's emotional intelligence and emotional maturity. You just reach this point where you can let your emotions yank you back and forth everywhere, but it just feels like another layer of beautiful emotional maturity. I so love that. And then I wrote freaking hard won, but that's definitely what it feels like. It's hard won. And I think it's always hard won for every single one of us. I don't think we drop into this world. If there are people who do that, I think there are enlightened souls that come into these, little children and they have it. But I think that's super rare. Okay. So for the majority of us, it's hard won. What it feels like after all these phases of intense growth, awareness, sadness, and all this stuff. Right now, I just feel stable. Nothing dramatic is happening on the inside. I've been feeling this for a while, but and I know you can relate to this. And if you've been watching or following along with me all these months and years now, you hopefully you can see, and you've been feeling that same thing too, because this is a growth path and a timeline that I think many of us have landed on. This just stillness on a quiet timeline, right? We're sitting, watching. Okay. I'm not chasing something to watch or listen to or to get an insight on. I still dip in every once in a while to watch something, to listen to something, but less and less and less am I looking at something to give me insight on, because I realize that I've got these deep insights all within myself and the answers and the beautiful downloads from my higher self. Okay. So I'm not chasing something to watch or listen or to get an insight on what is happening or what might happen or what could happen. It feels like who I was is completely gone. Now, this is something I have definitely talked about, but another layer has dropped in, especially with this stillness, quiet timeline. I feel like I'm floating on, and like again, not in a passive way. It's such an amazing. It's amazing to actually land there. So it feels like who I was is completely gone. Of course, not the core of who I am, not the good stuff. There's to the core of who we are, divine sparks of pure love and consciousness, God, Christ, consciousness, a piece of the divine universe that is everything. Um, the core of that, which makes us who we are, that's the good stuff. And that's not, the egotistical part, this reality part, this worldly part, this piece of me who makes me, perform in this matrix and all the stuff. I look back at all the things that I used to do and I used to be and who I considered myself. And there are most of that, it no longer exists. And it's really kind of amazing to land there. So, of course, not at the core of who I am, the good stuff, and who I am being or becoming isn't fully, and I'm not fully there yet. I just feel wide open for what's next. Okay. Without expectations. It's so interesting. I don't feel sad or hollow. I feel grounded, really grounded, like resting in wisdom. And that might sound a little egotistical, but it's simply meant to share where I've landed. I feel like I'm now resting in this wisdom, and thank God at this age, right? If I could have got that when I was in my 50s or 40s or 30s or 20s, of course, that's what we're all, if you're in those younger ages and you're listening to this, to land in this place of resting in wisdom, it's a beautiful place to land. And I would say the sooner that you can kind of, I think there's exponential energies and all of the things I like to talk about as far as quantum entanglement and how we can tap into those energies and frequencies no matter where you are, what age you are. In fact, I think that's a beautiful thing about being in a younger generation than where I sit, because you can tap into this and land on these things much, much, much sooner and younger than I did. I think all is in perfect timing for me. I don't live in regret on any level, but I think it's such a beautiful place to land. I no longer feel urgent about things. I will have these little moments dip in. I'll have, some of the things that I am going through in my 3D life here. There, I can feel moments of urgency, and then I just kind of go, I need to let this flow, take the action I need to, but let it flow. I'm not allowing anyone or anything to demand a reaction from me. I had a couple pretty big things happen this week that just, it there was a demand, and I realized I don't need to react to that. And the thing that's really cool is it actually landed in me almost immediately. It was very cool. Okay. It feels quiet and like an expanded kind of awareness. It just feels quiet. This quiet timeline. Holy cow. Okay. So like, I hope what I'm able to share with you, I hope you can really feel this, because this feels like a level up. It's like a whole nother level of the game that we're playing. Okay. I'm here in the world, but I'm not tangled up in it. I'm here, I'm in it, I'm present. And one of the big words that kept coming in for me was curiosity. Okay. So I'm not tangled in it anymore. I can choose to stay tangled. I can choose that as much as I want. Any of us can. Okay. What a beautiful thing to notice. And better yet, what a wonderful place to be. Sitting in this quiet timeline makes me feel like a watcher, and I put in quotation marks, watcher, not passively, but more like tuned in. Tuned into the right frequency. I'm tuned into the right channel. I think the more of us that have landed here and can just tune into that quiet timeline, sitting in this quiet timeline makes me feel like a watcher, not passively, but more like tuned in. I feel like I'm seeing patterns more clearly rather than just events as they happen. You know, it's interesting because we always say history repeats itself. There's always patterns, but it feels like these patterns now, I see them more clearly, and I don't have to be reactive to them, right? Things that seem complicated or hard, uncertain or scary, etc., just are. They just are. You know, I think that things that used to seem complicated, or hard or uncertain or scary, they just are. I don't need to know what's going to happen. You know, this one is a real interesting one for people to move past, because we want security and stability and safety and certainty. We want to be certain what's going to happen so we can make the right decisions. And it's always good to stay informed. But you realize I don't need to know what's going to happen. And then this, it feels like a rare place to be. It feels like, even though we might hear about this and talk about it, and we hear other people talk about it, it to actually land there and be there, it feels rare. It feels like it's a really rare place to be. You know, if you're feeling that too, I'd love to know. I'd love to know if you feel in that rare place, and not in a egotistical, I'm better than anyone kind of way. Simply just like the air is thinner up there. It's rare. It's more rare. It's like people that climb to the top of a mountain. It's rare. It's rare that people do that. You know, that's what it feels like. So then I wrote this, makes me wonder how many people have landed here right now too. How many have landed? It makes me curious. How many people have landed where I've landed? Would I recognize them? Maybe by their frequency. I need to pay attention as I move through my days, because I had that realization, like, how many people have landed here right now too? Would I recognize them? And this is kind of a deep desire that I'm starting to feel, and not in a sense of urgency, or I'm going to get all tangled up in it, but it's like, I would like to recognize them. I would like to feel their frequency, maybe by their frequency. I need to pay attention as I move through my days. I can't predict or control the future, and I know that no one is coming to save me. I know that to the deepest part of who I am. I'm here to take care of that myself. And when you land on that, I think when you first hear that or land on that, and it really resonates with you, it can be a little bit scary, because if you're always waiting for the next political person, the next economic upturn, the next religious figure, if you're waiting for any of those things to save you, it can be really, really uncertain, and it can rock your world to the core, especially if that's what you have been taught, that someone's going to come and save us. Even a solar flare coming to, or even the planets lining up astrologically. You're waiting for all these things to happen, all these cycles and it's just so fascinating. Okay, I can't predict or control the future, and I know that no one is coming to save me. It's quite powerful to fully land there. I'm not waiting for an outcome. I'm watching what will be born or created, and how will humanity evolve, and what part do I want to play in it? So that's the crux of it. That's the key, right? Okay, so I'm watching what will be born and created, and how will humanity evolve? Okay, and what part do I want to play? Because we can't control what other people are doing. We can't control what the government is doing. Now, we can take action and vote. We can do all the things that we're called to do. I'm not talking about those kinds of things. We can't control what they're spraying in the skies over us. We can control what we put in our body, the food that we eat. There's a lot of things we can control. But I'm watching what will be born and created, and how will humanity evolve. And then this most important last piece of that, and what part do I want to play in it? Okay, what part do I want to play? I'm not going to just passively sit and watch things happen. I mean, yeah, I certainly could, but I don't want to. What part do I want to play? And that's why it feels magical and not scary. Okay, that's what's so cool. That if you land there, and that's why it feels magical and not scary. Okay, to me, walking on a quiet timeline feels magical. It does not feel scary at this point. It's a sweet spot to land on, being deeply grounded and full of wonder. That is where I think the shift happens, because you can be grounded, you can look at reality, you can see all the things that are happening, you can be grounded, but then you need to actually add a sense of wonder back into your life. What part in the creativity of humanity evolving do I personally want to play? The world is your oyster, right? Okay, so it's a sweet spot to land on, being deeply grounded and full of wonder. Quietly ecstatic is what it feels like. Like, do you ever feel like goosebumps for no reason? Or maybe you see the sunset, or you see here in Salt Lake, I have the perfect view of the Wasatch Mountains as the sun comes up. And some of the sunrises that I get to see are just breathtaking. They give me the chills. In fact, about two weeks or so ago, there were these massive murmurations of birds that were flying around my house. And I grabbed my phone because it was unbelievable. It talk about filling me with wonder. And this happens usually once a year, maybe every couple of years, and depends on, it's usually this time of year, interestingly. But I think it's the seasons, it's the birds. But sometimes it feels like millions of birds. So I grabbed my cell phone and I just took like a minute and a half video that I got some of the greatest footage. And I actually used it on an Instagram reel that lives on the Barlow Herbal Instagram. You should go take a part of it, got used. And I actually had a couple people comment, oh, this is AI. And I was like, not everything is AI. There's a lot of things that are, but it was awe. It was just filled me with wonder. Like, look at this magical world we live in. And sometimes we just forget to pay attention, right? So that is what I would describe as quietly ecstatic. And now it wasn't quite quiet. There was so many birds. And the cool thing is we've had a super mild winter here in Utah. So my whole front yard there was no snow on it. So the birds will come there and they'll find things in the grass. And there were thousands of birds in my front yard, and they were all swooping around, and then they all flew away at once. It was just like, whoa, amazing. So the world seems richly textured if you let it, and timeless, okay? Even though in this matrix, time is clearly moving. Okay, so sometimes when you have these moments of quiet observation, quiet wonder and awe at the world that you're experiencing, you get to create, it feels timeless. It feels, we all know time is linear, but in this matrix of a world we live in, time is moving, okay? It's clearly moving. And what this brought me to is these two words, clear presence. I get to be present, but it gets to be clear. I don't have to be confused. I don't have to be yanked around. Just clear presence. Now I get to listen more than I speak. I get to notice what I'm being drawn to without effort. I get to listen more than I speak, and I get to notice what I'm being drawn to. What am I being drawn to? Not what am I forcing to happen? What am I forcing? I get to notice what I'm being drawn to. Okay, that's so beautiful. And there's no effort to that. I don't have to force meaning onto anyone or anything. I don't have to take a look at what's happening in the world that's just jaw-dropping in whatever happening politically, the unrest, the economics, what's going on with the silver and the gold and the digital stuff that's happening. And okay, I don't have to force meaning on anyone or anything. I don't have to force meaning on that. Now I can make decisions based on that, but I don't have to give it meaning other than how am I going to respond with what it means in my life at this moment? Okay. I don't have to do anything to keep this state of being. Okay. This is what I really landed on at the end of this week. I don't have to do anything to keep this state of being. Okay. I feel like if I try to force it, if I try to force it or anything, it will dissolve or go away. Okay. I don't need to do anything to keep this. And if I try to force myself to stay in this state, it feels like it will just dissolve. Okay. If this awareness had a voice, what would it be curious about? That was a really beautiful question that came in. If this beautiful, quiet, timeline, this just clear presence of awareness, if it had a voice, what would it be curious about? Not what it wants and not what it feels, just what would it be curious about? Okay, so then what I did is I came up with some really great questions, because that question dropped in at the very end. I was like, okay, this thought process, this brought on some beautiful, beautiful journaling questions. So I would encourage you to a couple things. Here's what I wrote. Try answering only one question at a time per sitting. And here's a really interesting way to journal with this. Stop before you complete. So stop before you feel complete with each question. And then let the curiosity stay slightly unfinished. Okay, that open edge is often where the richness deepens on its own. Okay, so this is where you're answering a question and maybe you're not quite done. And then and I've been actually doing this for a long, long time. When I sit and journal, I don't just journal until everything that's in my mind at the moment stops. I'll actually sit with it for a minute, and that's where some of this deep richness comes in. It's really stunning to experience unless you do it. Okay, so here's the first question. If this grounded awareness could linger anywhere in my life right now, where would it naturally rest its attention? And why there? So not to change it, not to improve it, just to notice where attention settles when it isn't being pulled. Okay? So the second question, what feels newly visible to me that I might not have noticed from a more reactive state? This could be subtle, like a pattern, a pause, a quiet truth, a nuance in how people move or speak. Let new mean newly seen, not newly created. Because we know there's things that we don't see because we're just not quiet enough to pay attention. And this is, again, where listening comes in. Listen more than you speak. I think it would be amazing to tune into that privacy piece of us, that we don't need to share everything. And I'm not talking about being secretive and hiding things. I'm talking about being private and listen. You would be amazed at what you would learn if you simply listen more. Okay, and this is what I love about this. Instead of, what would you notice if what feels newly visible if you were not being reactive? I love that. Okay, if this quiet timeline had its own rhythm, what would it be slower than, and what would it be more precise about? Okay, really think about that. Okay, consider tempo rather than outcome. Consider the tempo of your life. What speeds feel unnecessary now? A long time ago, I released the speed to get somewhere super quick when I'm going in my car. And this has kind of been the way I've driven all the time. Partly it started because I wanted to be safe when I had my little kids in the car. And then as I just became a person who's like, oh, it's so much smarter to let, erratic drivers, do what they do. So let me say this again. If this quiet timeline had its own rhythm, what would it be slower than, and what would it be more precise about? Okay? So what speeds feel unnecessary now, and what details feel worth lingering on? We pass over these beautiful moments so fast that we forget to enjoy the richness of them. Okay? That one's really, really powerful. And then this, what am I observing in the world right now that feels unprecedented? Think about that. That's massive. Actually, that just gave me the chills. And how does my body respond to simply witnessing it? Like, there are unprecedented events and frequencies, and there's unprecedented things happening right now. Okay. And how does my body respond when I witness it? Okay, so stay with the sensation before interpretation. So before you try to interpret it, sit with the sensation for a minute. We don't do that as modern humans in this fast-paced world, okay? Where does the body soften, steady, lean in, or become alert? Super important, super important. Okay, then this question. If this awareness were curious rather than concerned, what patterns in myself or others would it gently trace? Okay, not patterns to fix or diagnose, just recurring shapes, cycles, or movements that invite understanding. Super good. Okay, and then this. What feels surprisingly simple to hold now that once felt heavy or complicated? We can make things as heavy and as complicated as we want them to be. Okay, surprisingly simple to hold. Notice what no longer requires effort. Let ease be information, not something to justify. Oh, this is why you want to take these questions one at a time. Okay. If I were to describe this state to someone without using spiritual or psychological language, what images or metaphors would arise instead? Okay, that one is really, really good. Okay. Landscapes, weather, architecture, light, seasons. Let the image carry the meaning. They don't have to be anything super complicated. And yet we want to complicate it with spiritual jargon and all the psychological things we've learned. It doesn't have to be that complicated. You know, I had someone a week ago tell me that that I was going to get a sign with a flower with flowers, and I was like, okay, you know, I love a challenge like that. It was just kind of okay, we'll see what comes up. And then at the end of this week, so about a week later, I got this text from a really good friend of mine who sent me a picture of a flower shop near where we both live, and it said free rose or free flower for Jane. And apparently, what this flower shop does is they change the name once a week, and it's their way to, oh, my name's Jane. I'm going to go in and I'm going to buy some flowers, then I'll get a free flower. Well, my friend sent me this picture of this sign as she was, you know, I think she must have been parked at a stoplight and took the picture. And she's like, look, a sign, Jane. And this was not the person who said I was going to there was a flower that was going to come in. So, of course, a couple hours later, I got in my car. I drove down to this flower shop. I bought a little vase of flowers to put on my counter. And then I got a free yellow rose because yellow is my favorite color. I said to the cute girls that were working there, oh my gosh, I love that you guys do that. My name's Jane. And it was just, there are these, to me, that was so beautiful. And it was so simple, right? So we don't have to complicate everything. And then this, if this awareness were allowed to accompany me through ordinary moments, what subtleties might it enjoy noticing? Okay. What are the subtleties that we miss, the nuances? And like I've been talking about this whole time, what are these things that we miss? So again, these things, textures, timing, tone, micro choices, brief connections, nothing dramatic. Notice the tiny stuff, the little stuff. These are the things that always, you know, they always have the deepest meaning, right? You know, it reminds me when my babies were born, when my boys were just born and babies, you know, especially my first one, I would sit and hold him for hours while he slept, and I would just look at him. I was so in love. And I'm sure if you're a mother or even a grandmother or even a father and you hold your newborn, and it's just simple, it's a baby sleeping, and it's simple and beautiful, and that's not dramatic, it's just quiet and beautiful. Okay, and then this last question, if this way of being were not temporary or permanent, just present, what would it be curious to experience next without the urgency? Not a goal, not a plan, just a direction curiosity might glance toward and then release. So I just thought that, wow, this is going to be so fun to share. In fact, I couldn't wait to jump on. I was like, okay, February 1st, 2026, here we are going on this beautiful, crazy ride that we're on. And when you land in a place where you're sitting on a quiet timeline, it changes everything. And I think that there's moments where, you know, it's going to not seem quiet for a minute, and then I get to draw myself back there. And I love the idea of staying curious, staying in a place of awe and wonder. You know, you hear this ad nauseum for years and years and years. Go back to the awe and wonder of being a child, because everything is new to a child. And I know that as adults, when we reach hopefully we reach this place of this wisdom where it's just clarity and awareness and love and curiosity and what can I contribute and what can I create. It's a really, really beautiful place to land. And in these times that we are in, I think it's especially important, but without the drama. We get to choose what we put on everything that's happening right now. So I would love to know what you think about this. And wow, here we go into the very first week of February of 2026. So I hope you have an absolutely beautiful, beautiful week. And thank you for tuning in like usual. And we will see you next time.